My name is Hannah, and the day I was told I had cancer was the same day my family chose my cousin's wedding over my survival. I was 37, sitting in a stark antiseptic doctor's office, my fingers digging into the armrests of a chair that felt too flimsy to hold the weight of the words crashing over me. Stage 2 breast cancer. The doctor's voice was kind, measured, but each syllable hit like a hammer biopsy. Chemotherapy survival odds swirled in my head, a storm of terms I wasn't ready to understand. I stared at the worn linoleum floor, its cracks blurring through tears I didn't realize were falling, trying to tether myself to a world that had just spun out of control. I needed my family. I needed my mom to wrap me in her arms, my dad to tell me I was tougher than this, my sister to sit with me and cry. But when I called them, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the phone, they didn't answer. They didn't come. They were too consumed with planning the wedding of the century for my cousin Lila, the shining star who eclipsed us all. I grew up in a tight-knit town in Ohio where family was supposed to be your rock, your safe harbor. My parents, Diane and Robert, were the kind of people who wore their pride like a crown, especially when it came to Lila. She was my aunt's daughter, but you'd think she was their own flesh and blood. Lila was breathtaking golden hair, a laugh that could charm anyone, the kind of charisma that made people gravitate to her like moths to a flame. She was homecoming queen valedictorian, the girl who could smile and make the world rearrange itself to please her. I was the shadow in her light, quiet studious, the one who faded into the background. I wasn't unattractive, but in their eyes I was plain. Brown hair, brown eyes, a face that didn't demand attention. My parents loved me, I suppose, but it was a practical love conditional, always measured against Lila's brilliance. "Why can't you be more like Lila?" my mom would say, her tone half joking but sharp enough to sting when I brought home a B instead of an A. "Lila's going to change the world," my dad would muse, his eyes glowing in a way they never did for me. My older sister Megan was no kinder. She'd roll her eyes when I tried to join her, and Lila's conversations dismissing me as the dull one. I learned early to shrink myself to keep my dreams small, to avoid competing with the supernova that was Lila. By 37, I'd built a life I was proud of, even if my family refused to see it. I ran a small event planning business specializing in restoring historic venues. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my passion. I poured my heart into every project breathing life, into crumbling ballrooms, turning forgotten spaces into places where people could celebrate their happiest moments. I lived in a modest apartment in Columbus, drove a used sedan, and saved every penny I could. What my family didn't know was that I'd been quietly investing in the venues I restored, buying shares, building a portfolio that was starting to turn heads in the industry. I'd negotiated deals with property owners, secured loans, and taken risks that kept me awake at night. To them, I was just Hannah, unmarried, childless, the one who hadn't made it. And when I needed them most, they showed me exactly how little I meant to them. That day in the doctor's office, I called my mom first. My hands shook so badly, I fumbled the phone twice before it connected. When she finally picked up, I heard laughter, clinking glasses, and music in the background. Lila's engagement party. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking like thin ice. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." I told her about the diagnosis, the words spilling out in a rush raw, and unfiltered, my chest tight with fear. There was a long pause, then she said, "Oh, Hannah, I'm so sorry, sweetheart, but we're in the middle of something. Can we talk later?" Later! As if cancer could be scheduled like a dentist appointment. As if I could wait. I tried my dad next, but his phone rang out. Megan's went straight to voicemail, her chipper greeting mocking me. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, the engine off, the air thick with summer heat, staring at the steering wheel as tears burned tracks down my face. It felt like I was screaming into a void, and no one was listening. The weeks that followed were a fog of fear and exhaustion. I started chemotherapy, which left me hollowed out, my hair, thinning my body, betraying me in ways I couldn't predict. Nausea gripped me at odd hours. Fatigue made even simple tasks feel like climbing a mountain. I kept my family updated, sending texts, leaving voicemails, hoping they'd show up, even just for an hour. They didn't. Instead, I got half-hearted replies, "We're praying for you, Hannah," or "Let us know if you need anything." What I needed was them, their presence, their love, their acknowledgement that I was fighting for my life. But they were obsessed with Lila's wedding, a 3-day extravaganza at a historic estate called Rosewood Manor. It was the kind of place I'd always dreamed of, restoring a sprawling Victorian with ivy-covered walls, stained glass windows, and a ballroom that could hold 300 guests. My mom flooded our family group chat with photos: Lila in her custom gown, the floral arches, the hand-calligraphed invitations. I wasn't invited, not officially. When I asked Megan about it, her voice was breezy, dismissive. "It's a small guest list, Hannah. You understand, right? Besides, you're not feeling well." Not feeling well, as if cancer was a head cold I'd shake off in a few days. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. I had bigger things to worry about, surviving for one. But the rejection cut deeper than any chemo needle. I'd spent my life chasing their approval, trying to prove I was worthy of their love, and now at my lowest, they'd turned their backs on me. One night, I sat in my apartment, a chemo port bulging under my skin, a scarf wrapped around my patchy scalp, scrolling through the group chat. My dad had posted Lila's going to look like royalty. "This wedding will be unforgettable. Unforgettable." The word lodged in my throat like a shard of glass. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was fighting to stay alive while they planned a party. I wanted to ask why I wasn't enough, why I never had been. Instead, I turned off my phone and cried, until my chest ached, until I had no tears left to give. What they didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I had a secret connection to Rosewood Manor. Months before my diagnosis, I'd been approached by the estate's owner, Mr. Ellison, a soft-spoken man in his 70s with a love for history. The manor was crumbling its grandeur, fading under the weight of time and neglect, and he couldn't afford the repairs. I'd proposed a deal my company would fund the restoration, new wiring restored, woodwork, modern plumbing, in exchange for a 40% stake in the property. It was a massive risk. I'd poured nearly $1 million into it, tying up my savings, taking out loans, betting everything on Rosewood's potential. By the time Lila's wedding was booked, I'd transformed the estate. My heart was in every detail: the polished oak floors, the crystal chandeliers, the gardens I'd helped design. I was a silent partner, my name nowhere on the contracts or guest lists, but my soul was woven into that place. The irony was almost cruel. My family was celebrating at a venue I'd saved, and they didn't even know it. As the wedding approached, I stood at a crossroads. I could stay silent, let them have their day, bury my pain in the fight for my health. Or I could show up uninvited and demand to be seen. I wasn't sure I had the strength for either. Chemo had left me frail, my body a stranger, pale, thin, a shadow of who I'd been. But something inside me, a flicker of defiance, refused to let them erase me. I'd spent too long being the invisible one, the one who didn't matter. I'd fought too hard, lost too much, to stay in the shadows. Maybe it was time to step into the light. Maybe it was time to show them who I really was. Not the Hannah they'd dismissed, but the woman I'd become. The weeks after my diagnosis felt like wading through quicksand, each step heavier than the last. Chemotherapy was a thief, stealing my energy, my hair, my sense of self. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger, pale skin, stretched thin eyes sunken, a scarf wrapped around my head to hide the patches where my hair had fallen out. But the physical toll was nothing compared to the loneliness. My family's absence was a wound that wouldn't heal, a constant ache that pulsed with every unanswered text, every voicemail left to gather dust. They were consumed with Lila's wedding, their world orbiting her star, while I fought for my life in the shadows. I'd lie awake at night, the hum of my neighbor's air conditioner filling the silence, wondering what I'd done to deserve this, why I wasn't enough for them, why my pain didn't matter. But in those dark moments, a spark of something stubborn, something fierce began to grow. I wasn't ready to give up, not on myself, not on the life I'd built. I started chemo in early spring, the world outside my apartment blooming while I withered. My days were a cycle of hospital visits, nausea, and bone-deep fatigue. I'd drag myself to appointments clutching a worn notebook where I jotted down questions for the doctors. Questions I was too scared to ask aloud. Will I lose all my hair? How long will I feel like this? Will I make it? The nurses were kind, their smiles a small comfort, but they couldn't fill the void left by my family. I'd see other patients in the chemo ward, their loved ones holding their hands, bringing blankets, whispering encouragement. And I'd feel a pang so sharp, it took my breath away. I wanted that. I needed that. But all I had was myself, and I was learning slowly that maybe that was enough. One morning, after a particularly brutal session, I stopped at a coffee shop near the hospital. My hands trembled as I ordered a chamomile tea, hoping it would settle my stomach. The barista, a woman in her 60s with warm brown eyes and a name tag that read, Eleanor, noticed my scarf and the way I leaned heavily on the counter. Rough day, honey, she asked, her voice soft but not pitying. I nodded, too tired to lie. She slid my tea across the counter and added a blueberry scone, waving off my attempt to pay. On the house, she said, you look like you could use a little kindness. I don't know why, but that small gesture broke me. I sat in a corner booth, tears spilling over, as I nibbled the scone, its sweetness, a stark contrast to the bitterness in my heart. Eleanor came over, during a lull, wiping her hands on her apron, and sat across from me. You don't have to tell me anything, she said, but I'm here if you want to talk. I didn't plan to open up, but the words came anyway, spilling out like water from a cracked dam. I told her about the cancer, the chemo, my family's absence, the wedding that had eclipsed my existence. Eleanor listened, her eyes steady, her hands folded on the table. When I finished, she reached across and squeezed my hand. You're carrying too much, Hannah, she said. But you're stronger than you know. I can see it. I wanted to believe her, but strength felt like a foreign language, one I'd never learned to speak. Still, her words stuck with me, a lifeline in the storm. Eleanor became my anchor in those early months. I'd stop by the coffee shop after appointments, and she'd have a tea, waiting sometimes with a note scribbled on the cup. You've got this, or one day at a time. She told me stories about her life, how she'd raised 3 kids alone. After her husband left, how she'd started the coffee shop, with nothing but a dream and a second-hand espresso machine. Life's not fair, she'd say, but it's yours to shape. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Her belief in me was a mirror reflecting a version of myself. I'd forgotten a woman who'd built a business from scratch, who'd taken risks, who'd never backed down from a challenge. Slowly, I started to see her point. I wasn't just a victim of cancer or my family's neglect. I was Hannah, and I had a story of my own to write. Work became my refuge, a place where I could still feel like me. My business was struggling. Chemo meant I couldn't take on as many projects, and my savings were dwindling, but I refused to let it die. I'd sit at my kitchen table laptop, open reviewing contracts, emailing clients, sketching plans for venues. Rosewood Manor was my biggest project yet, and even in my weakest moments, it gave me purpose. I'd think about the chandeliers I'd chosen, the gardens I'd helped design, the history I'd preserved. My family didn't know I'd invested nearly everything I had into that estate, that I'd taken out loans, bet my future on its success. They didn't know I was a silent partner, my name hidden behind layers of paperwork, my contributions invisible to the world. But I knew, and that was enough to keep me going. One evening, as I sorted through invoices, my phone buzzed with a new message in the family group chat. It was a photo of Lila at her dress fitting her gown, a cascade of lace and pearls. Her smile radiant. My mom's caption read, "Our princess is ready. Rosewood's going to be magical." I stared at the screen, my chest tight. Magical. The word felt like a slap. I'd made Rosewood magical, my money, my vision, my heart. and they were celebrating without me, oblivious to my role, my pain, my existence. I wanted to reply, to tell them the truth, to scream that I was fighting for my life, while they fawned over a party. But I didn't. I set the phone down, my hands shaking, and made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for their attention. I was going to fight for my health, for my business, for the woman I was becoming. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. "You're stronger than you know." I started to believe her. I began keeping a journal, scribbling my thoughts between chemo sessions, documenting the fear, the anger, the glimmers of hope. I wrote about Rosewood, about the legacy I was building, about the woman I wanted to be when this was over. I made lists of goals, small ones, like getting through a day without nausea, and big ones like expanding my business, proving to myself I could rise above this. I started eating better, forcing myself to choke down smoothies when all I wanted was to sleep. I took short walks around my block, leaning on a cane when my legs wobbled, determined to reclaim my body. Each step felt like defiance, a middle finger to the disease and the family that had written me off. One afternoon, I got a call from Mr. Ellison, the owner of Rosewood Manor. His voice was warm, tinged with excitement. "Hannah, the restoration's ahead of schedule," he said. "The ballroom's a masterpiece. We're getting inquiries from all over the country." My heart swelled, a rare moment of joy in the fog of chemo. "And Lila's wedding," he added, "it's going to showcase everything you've done. You should be proud." Proud. The word felt foreign, but I clung to it. I didn't tell him I wasn't invited, that my family didn't know I'd funded the venue. I just thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Lila's wedding was in 2 months. I had 2 months to decide what to do, how to face them, how to reclaim my place in a world that had tried to erase me. I started to imagine showing up at Rosewood, walking into that ballroom I'd saved, standing tall. Despite the chemo, the scars, the pain, I pictured the looks on their faces, my mom's shock, my dad's guilt, Megan's disbelief. But more than that, I imagined myself strong, unbroken, a woman who didn't need their validation to know her worth. I wasn't there yet, but I was getting closer. With Eleanor's encouragement, my journal as my witness, and Rosewood as my legacy, I was starting to fight back. Not just against cancer, but against the idea that I was less than that, I didn't matter. I was Hannah, and I was going to make them see me. The spring turned to summer, and the world outside my apartment burst into color. Vibrant greens, blooming flowers, the kind of beauty that felt like a cruel contrast to the gray haze of my life. Chemotherapy was relentless, stripping away layers of who I'd been. My hair was nearly gone now, my scalp a patchwork of stubble under the scarves I wore. My body ached constantly, a deep gnawing fatigue that made even getting out of bed feel like a victory. But the physical pain was only half the battle. The silence from my family was a heavier weight, a reminder that while I fought for my life, they were planning a celebration that didn't include me. Lila's wedding loomed closer, its shadow stretching over every thought, every moment. Yet in that darkness, I was finding something new, a quiet, stubborn strength, a refusal to let their neglect define me. My days were a careful balance of survival and defiance. I'd wake early, force down a smoothie packed with spinach and protein, and head to chemo appointments, my notebook tucked under my arm. The hospital became a second home, its fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell as familiar as my own apartment. The nurses knew me by name, offering small kindnesses, a warm blanket, a gentle pat on the shoulder that kept me grounded. I'd sit in the recliner, the IV dripping poison into my veins, and write in my journal, pouring out the fear, the anger, the flickers of hope that refused to die. I wrote about Rosewood Manor, the venue I'd saved, its ballroom, a testament to my vision. I wrote about Eleanor, the barista, who'd become my lifeline, her words a beacon in the fog. And I wrote about myself, the woman I was becoming, someone who could face cancer and betrayal and still choose to stand. Eleanor's coffee shop was my sanctuary. I'd stop by after appointments, my steps slow but deliberate, and she'd have a chamomile tea, waiting sometimes with a scone or a cookie she insisted was just because. We'd talk for hours when the shop was quiet, her stories of resilience weaving a thread of possibility through my despair. She told me about her youngest son who'd overcome addiction to become a teacher and her own battle with debt when she opened the shop. "Life's a fight, Hannah," she'd say, her eyes crinkling with a mix of wisdom and mischief. "But you don't win by waiting for someone else to throw you a rope. You climb out yourself." I clung to that idea, turning it over in my mind like a smooth stone. Climbing out. It wasn't easy, but I was trying. One afternoon, as I sipped tea in the shop's corner booth, Eleanor slid a flyer across the table. It was for a local small business grant offering $50,000 to entrepreneurs with innovative ideas. "You should apply," she said, tapping the paper. "Your work with those venues, it's special. People need to see it." I hesitated, doubt creeping in. My business was barely holding on. Chemo had forced me to scale back, and I was burning through savings to cover Rosewood's restoration. But Eleanor's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You're not just fighting cancer," she said. "You're fighting for your legacy. Don't let anyone take that from you." Her words lit a spark. I took the flyer home, taped it to my fridge, and started drafting an application that night. I wrote about Rosewood, about transforming forgotten spaces into places of joy, about building something that lasted. It was a long shot, but it felt like a step toward reclaiming my life. Work kept me sane, even when my body begged me to stop. I'd spend evenings at my kitchen table laptop glowing reviewing budgets for Rosewood, emailing contractors, sketching ideas for future projects. The manor was nearly complete, its transformation a mirror of my own slow rebuilding. Mr. Ellison called weekly, his voice brimming with pride. "Hannah, the place is a miracle," he'd say. "The ballroom's booked solid for next year already." I'd smile, the praise warming me, but I never told him about my family, about the wedding that would showcase my work to the people who'd dismissed me. I wasn't ready to face that truth, not yet. But the thought of Lila's wedding, of my family, dancing in a space I'd created, stirred a mix of pain and determination. They didn't know what I'd done, but maybe they would. Maybe I'd make them see. The family group chat was a constant reminder of my invisibility. Every day brought new photos, Lila's bouquet, the string quartet, the custom cake. My mom's messages were effusive. "Rosewood's a dream, Lila's going to shine." My dad chimed in, "This is our family's moment, our family." The words stung, a reminder that I wasn't part of their vision. I stopped responding. My silence a small act of rebellion. Megan noticed, texting me privately, "You're being dramatic, Hannah. It's just a wedding, just a wedding." As if it hadn't consumed them, as if it hadn't pushed me out of their lives. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured my energy into my journal, my work, my fight. I started physical therapy to regain strength, pushing through the pain, determined to walk without a cane by summer's end. I meditated, forcing myself to breathe through the panic that crept in at night. I was rebuilding piece by piece, and it felt like a secret only I knew. One evening, I got an unexpected email. The Small Business Grant Committee had selected my application as a finalist. They wanted a presentation in 2 weeks, a chance to pitch my vision in person. My heart raced, a mix of fear and excitement. I hadn't spoken publicly in months, hadn't stood in front of a crowd since chemo began. But this was an opportunity, a lifeline for my business, a way to prove I was more than my family's cast off. I called Eleanor, my voice shaking with nerves. "You're going to crush it," she said, no hesitation. "Show them who you are." I spent the next week preparing crafting slides about Rosewood, practicing in front of my mirror, ignoring the way my reflection looked thin, pale, but alive. I bought a new blazer, one that fit my changed body, and a silk scarf to cover my scalp. I wasn't hiding, I was choosing how to be seen. The presentation was held in a sleek conference room downtown, the kind of place that smelled of ambition and coffee. I was the last to speak, my hands clammy as I set up my laptop. The panel, 5 business owners and a city official, watched me with polite interest. I took a deep breath, thought of Eleanor of Rosewood, of the woman I was fighting to become, and began. I told them about my business, about restoring history, about creating spaces where people could find joy. I showed photos of Rosewood's transformation, its ballroom glowing under chandeliers I'd chosen. I didn't mention my cancer, but it was there in the tremor of my voice, the determination in my eyes. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, then erupted in applause. One of the judges, a woman with sharp eyes and a warm smile, leaned forward. "Hannah, that was extraordinary," she said. "You're not just saving buildings, you're telling stories." I left the room feeling lighter, like I'd reclaimed a piece of myself. A week later, I got the call I'd won the grant. $50,000, enough to keep my business afloat, to hire help, to take on new projects. I cried when I hung up, not from sadness, but from relief, from pride. I called Eleanor, who whooped so loudly, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I told you, Hannah," she said. "You're unstoppable." For the first time in months, I believed her. The grant wasn't just money, it was validation proof that my work mattered, that I mattered. I started planning how to use it, hiring an assistant, expanding Rosewood's marketing, maybe even buying more shares in the manor. But Lila's wedding was a week away, and with it came a choice I couldn't ignore. I sat in my apartment, the grant letter in my lap, and thought about Rosewood. My family would be there, dancing, laughing, toasting Lila, in a space I'd brought back to life. They didn't know I'd funded it, that my heart was in every detail. I could stay away, let them have their day, keep my secret. Or I could go uninvited and show them who I was. Not the Hannah they'd dismissed, but the woman who'd fought, who'd won, who'd built something extraordinary. Chemo had weakened my body, but it hadn't broken my spirit. I was still here, still fighting, and I was done being invisible. I didn't know what I'd do when I got there, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let them forget me. The grant win was a turning point, a beacon in the fog of my life. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of possibility, a sense that I could shape my future, despite the cancer, despite my family's neglect. The $50,000 was more than money. It was a vote of confidence, a reminder that my work, my vision had value. I spent the days after the announcement in a flurry of activity, meeting with my accountant to allocate the funds, hiring a part-time assistant named Tara, a bright-eyed college graduate who believed in my mission. I poured myself into Rosewood Manor's final touches, coordinating with contractors to ensure every detail was perfect for Lila's wedding. It was bittersweet knowing my family would celebrate in a space I'd saved, oblivious to my role. But that knowledge also fueled me a quiet fire that burned brighter with each step I took toward reclaiming my life. Physically, I was still fragile. Chemotherapy had left me thin, my skin pale, my energy fleeting. But I was fighting back, reclaiming my body bit by bit. I'd graduated from a cane to slow, deliberate walks around my neighborhood, my scarf fluttering in the summer breeze. I'd started yoga, gentle stretches that eased the ache in my joints, and forced myself to eat nutrient-dense meals, even when nausea made food repulsive. My journal was my confidant pages filled with dreams of expansion, new venues, a bigger team, a legacy that would outlast me. Eleanor's encouragement echoed in my mind. "You're unstoppable." I was beginning to believe her, to see myself not as a victim, but as a warrior, scarred but standing. Work became my lifeline, a place where I could be more than my illness or my family's cast off. Tara's arrival was a godsend. She handled emails, scheduled meetings, and brought an infectious energy that lifted my spirits. Together we mapped out a plan to use the grant $20,000, to pay down Rosewood's loans $15,000 for marketing, and the rest to hire a second assistant and upgrade our software. I started negotiating with Mr. Bjornstad Ellison to increase my stake in Rosewood, leveraging the grant as proof of my commitment. He was thrilled, his voice warm over the phone. "Hannah, you're the heart of this place," he said. "I'm lucky to have you." His words were a balm, a contrast to the silence from my family. I didn't tell him about the wedding, about my exclusion. I wasn't ready to share that wound, not even with him. The family group chat continued its relentless parade of wedding updates. Photos of Lila's rehearsal dinner, the venue decked out in fairy lights, the bridal party in matching robes. My mom's messages were giddy. Rosewood's a fairy tale, Lila's our princess. My dad added, "This is a day we'll never forget." Each post was a dagger, a reminder that I was outside their circle, uninvited, unseen. Megan texted me once, a half-hearted attempt at connection. "You doing okay, Hannah? Sorry things are so busy." I didn't respond. I was done begging for scraps of their attention. Instead, I focused on my own world, my business, my health, my fight. I bought a new dress for the grant ceremony, a navy sheath that hugged my changed body, and practiced standing tall in front of my mirror, imagining the woman I'd be when this was over. The grant ceremony was held in a sleek downtown hotel, a room filled with local entrepreneurs, city officials, and press. I was one of 5 recipients, and when my name was called, I walked to the podium, my heart pounding but my steps steady. The MC read from my application, praising my work with historic venues, my vision for preserving stories through architecture. I gave a short speech, my voice stronger than I expected, thanking Eleanor Terra and Mr. Ellison for believing in me. I didn't mention my cancer, but it was there in the weight of my words, the fire in my eyes. The audience applauded, and afterward a reporter from the Columbus Dispatch approached me asking for an interview. "Your story's inspiring," she said. "People need to hear it." I agreed, my mind racing, with the possibility of sharing my work, my truth, on a bigger stage. The interview was published a few days later, a half-page feature with a photo of me at Rosewood standing in the ballroom I'd restored. The headline read, "Local Entrepreneur Revives History, One Venue at a Time." It detailed my business, the grant, and my passion for preservation, though I'd kept my cancer private. Tara printed the article and taped it to my office wall, grinning. "You're a rock star, Hannah." I laughed, the sound foreign but welcome. The article brought a flood of inquiries, couples wanting to book, Rosewood investors interested in my portfolio, even a historic society offering a partnership. My business, once teetering, was gaining momentum, and with it, my sense of self. I was no longer just surviving. I was building, creating, thriving. But Lila's wedding was 3 days away, and the weight of it pressed against me. I'd received no invitation, no acknowledgement, just Megan's casual text. "Wish you could be there, but you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I didn't understand why my fight for my life was less important than a party, why I'd been erased from their story. I sat in my apartment, the Dispatch article in my lap, and thought about Rosewood. My money had restored its walls, my vision had brought it to life. My family would dance under chandeliers I'd chosen, walk on floors I'd paid to polish, and they'd never know. The injustice of it burned, but so did the opportunity. I could show up uninvited and claim my place. I could stand in that ballroom and make them see me, not the Hannah they'd dismissed, but the woman who'd funded their fairy tale. I called Eleanor, needing her clarity. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice raw. "Do I go or do I let it go?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Hannah, you've spent too long letting them define you. Go for yourself, not for them. Show up because you deserve to be there." Her words settled into me, a call to action. I hung up and pulled out my journal, writing a single sentence, "I am enough." I repeated it like a mantra, letting it drown out the doubts, the fear, the pain. I decided to go to the wedding, not to confront my family, but to honor my work, my strength, my survival. I'd wear my navy dress, my silk scarf, and walk into Rosewood with my head high, a silent testament to everything I'd overcome. The day before the wedding, I met with Mr. Ellison at Rosewood. The manor was breathtaking, gardens in full bloom, the ballroom aglow with soft lighting tables set with linens I'd approved. He walked me through the space, pointing out details we'd agonized over, his pride mirroring my own. "This is your legacy, Hannah," he said, squeezing my hand. "Don't ever forget that." I didn't tell him I planned to attend, but I asked a favor. If anyone asked about the restoration, could he mention my role? He agreed, his eyes twinkling. "You deserve the credit," he said. I left Rosewood feeling lighter, ready to face whatever came next. That night, I stood in front of my mirror practicing my entrance. I imagined my family's faces, my mom's shock, my dad's discomfort, Megan's disbelief. I didn't want their apologies, not anymore. I wanted them to see me, to know what I'd done, to understand they'd underestimated me. Chemo had taken so much, but it hadn't taken my spirit, my drive, my heart. I was Hannah, the woman who'd saved Rosewood, who'd won a grant, who'd fought cancer alone. I was enough, and tomorrow I'd prove it, not to them but to myself. As I lay in bed, the summer air warm through my open window, I thought about the ballroom, its chandeliers casting light on a celebration I'd made possible. I didn't know what would happen when I walked through those doors, but I knew one thing: I wasn't invisible anymore. I was ready to step into the light, to claim my place, to show the world and myself who I really was. The morning of Lila's wedding dawned bright and warm, the kind of summer day that felt like a promise. I woke early, my body aching from the latest chemo session, but my mind was clear, resolute. Today wasn't about my family or their neglect. It was about me, about honoring the woman I'd become, the work I'd done, the battles I'd fought. I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing the navy dress. I'd chosen its clean lines, giving me a quiet confidence. The silk scarf around my head was a soft gray, a nod to my changed body, but also a badge of survival. I applied a touch of makeup, just enough to brighten my pale skin, and looked into my own eyes. "You are enough," I whispered the mantra I'd written in my journal now, a truth I carried in my bones. I was ready to walk into Rosewood Manor, not as an uninvited guest, but as the woman who'd brought it back to life. Driving to the venue, I felt a mix of nerves and calm. The Ohio countryside rolled past fields of green under a wide blue sky, and I let the beauty steady me. Rosewood was 40 minutes from Columbus, a grand estate nestled among ancient oaks. Its Victorian silhouette a testament to history and my own determination. I'd poured nearly $1 million into its restoration, my savings, my loans, my heart, and today, my family would celebrate in its glow, unaware of my role. The thought no longer stung as it once had. It was their ignorance, not my failure. I wasn't going to confront them or demand their attention. I was going to stand in my truth, let the space I'd created speak for itself, and let the chips fall where they may. When I pulled into Rosewood's gravel driveway, the parking lot was already full cars. Gleaming under the sun, guests in elegant dresses and suits streaming toward the entrance. I parked at the far end, giving myself a moment to breathe. The manor loomed ahead, its ivy-covered walls and stained glass windows radiant in the daylight. I'd seen it in sketches in progress in my dreams, but now finished, it was breathtaking. My chest swelled with pride. This was my work, my legacy. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the entrance, my steps slow but steady. A young staff member in a black vest greeted me, checking a guest list on a tablet. Name he asked, his tone polite but brisk. I hesitated, then said Hannah Ellis. I'm not on the list, but I'm with the restoration team. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. He frowned, then nodded. Mr. Ellison mentioned you. Go on in. The foyer was a vision, marble floors. I'd chosen a chandelier. Casting prisms of light, fresh flowers in vases I'd approved. Guests milled about, their laughter and chatter filling the air. I recognized a few faces, distant cousins, family friends, but no one acknowledged me. I was a ghost in their world, invisible as always. I made my way to the ballroom where the ceremony would take place and paused at the threshold. The space was a masterpiece, high ceilings, with restored frescoes, windows flooding the room, with a golden light rows of chairs draped in white silk. My family was near the front, my mom in a pale pink dress, my dad in a tux, Megan adjusting Lila's veil. Lila looked like a dream, her gown, shimmering, her smile radiant. For a moment, I felt a pang, not jealousy, but a wistful ache for the connection we'd never had. Then I straightened, reminding myself why I was here. This wasn't their moment. It was mine. I slipped into a seat at the back unnoticed and watched the ceremony unfold. The officiant spoke of love and commitment, words that felt hollow against the backdrop of my family's absence in my life. Lila and her groom, a handsome lawyer named Ethan, exchanged vows, their voices clear and joyful. The guests clapped, my parents beaming, Megan dabbing her eyes. I sat quietly, my hands folded, feeling the weight of the space around me. Every detail, the polished wood, the crystal sconces, the soft glow of the lights was mine. I'd fought for this through chemo, through heartbreak, through doubt. And that was enough. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the gardens for cocktails, and I lingered in the ballroom, running my fingers along a table's edge, remembering the late nights spent choosing linens, the arguments with contractors over budget. A voice behind me startled me. Hannah, it was Mr. Ellison. His silver hair catching the light, his smile warm. I didn't expect to see you here. I smiled back, a little shy. I couldn't stay away. This place means too much. He nodded, understanding. You should be proud. None of this would have happened without you. His words were a gift, a validation I hadn't realized I needed. He offered to introduce me to some guests, but I shook my head. I'm just here to see it, I said. That's enough for now. He squeezed my arm and left, promising to find me later. The reception was set to begin, and I debated leaving. I'd done what I came to do, seen my work, felt its truth. But something urged me to stay, a quiet insistence that I wasn't done. I joined the crowd in the ballroom, now transformed with round tables, flickering candles, and a dance floor gleaming under my chandeliers. I found a spot near the back, sipping sparkling water, watching my family from a distance. They were in their element, my mom laughing with aunts, my dad toasting with Ethan's father, Megan posing for photos with Lila. I felt no urge to join them, no need for their approval. I was here for me. Dinner was served, and I sat at a table with strangers making small talk, deflecting questions about my scarf. The food was exquisite, the menu one I'd helped design months ago. As dessert was cleared, the MC took the stage, a local DJ with a booming voice. He thanked the guests, the couple, the staff, then paused. Before we start the dancing, I have a special announcement, he said. My heart skipped. Rosewood Manor is more than a venue, it's a piece of history brought back to life through the vision and generosity of one person. Please join me in thanking Hannah Ellis, whose investment and passion made this day possible. The room erupted in applause, and I froze my glass halfway to my lips. Heads turned, searching for me. Mr. Ellison, standing near the stage, gestured for me to stand. My legs trembled, but I rose, smoothing my dress, my scarf catching the light. The spotlight found me, and for a moment I was the center of the room. My family's faces were a blur in the crowd, my mom's mouth open, my dad's eyes wide, Megan's hand frozen mid-clap. I gave a small wave, my smile steady, and sat down as the applause continued. The MC moved on, but the moment lingered, a seismic shift. They knew now, they saw me. Whispers rippled through the room, guests glancing my way. Some approaching to thank me. You're the one who saved this place? A woman asked, her eyes bright. It's incredible. I nodded, my voice soft but sure. It's my heart's work. My family stayed at their table, their expressions unreadable, but I didn't care. I'd come to claim my place, and I had. The band started, couples flooding the dance floor, and I slipped outside to the gardens needing air. The night was warm, fireflies dancing in the dusk. I sat on a bench, the manor glowing behind me, and felt a peace I hadn't known in months. I'd fought cancer, fought my family's dismissal, fought for this moment. And I'd won. Megan found me an hour later, her heels clicking on the stone path. Hannah, she said, her voice tight. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her calm. I tried. You weren't listening. She flinched, her eyes darting away. We didn't know about Rosewood, about you. I shrugged, no anger left. You didn't ask. She stood there searching for words, then turned and left. I didn't call her back. I didn't need to. The stars were out, the music, drifting from the ballroom, and I was enough. The night of Lila's wedding left me changed, as if a weight I'd carried for years had finally lifted. Standing in that ballroom under the spotlight, hearing my name echo through a space I'd brought back to life, it was a moment of triumph, not over my family, but over the doubts that had haunted me. The applause, the whispers, the stunned looks on my parents' and Megan's faces, they were secondary. What mattered was the truth I'd claimed I was Hannah, the woman who'd fought cancer-funded Rosewood and built a legacy despite being written off. As I drove home under a sky scattered with stars, the summer air warm through my open window, I felt a quiet power settling into me. I wasn't invisible anymore, and I never would be again. The days after the wedding were a whirlwind. The Columbus Dispatch article had already sparked interest in my business, but the MC's announcement at Rosewood turned that spark into a blaze. My inbox overflowed with inquiries, couples wanting to book the Manor event, planners seeking partnerships, even a historic preservation group offering a grant for future projects. Tara, my assistant, was a godsend, sorting through emails, scheduling calls, and keeping me grounded with her infectious optimism. "Hannah, you're blowing up," she'd say, grinning, as she handed me a stack of messages. I laughed, but the truth was I was overwhelmed. Chemo still left me, drained my body. A battleground, but the momentum of my business gave me a reason to keep pushing. I started physical therapy in earnest, determined to rebuild my strength. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, pushed me to my limits. Leg presses, resistance bands, balance exercises that left me sweating and cursing under my breath. "You're tougher than you look," she'd say, a sly smile on her face. I clung to that, adding it to the mantra I'd built, "I am enough." I was eating better too, blending kale and berries into smoothies. Baking salmon for dinner, forcing myself to nourish a body that had been through hell. My hair was starting to grow back a soft fuzz under my scarves, and I'd catch myself touching it, marveling at the resilience of my own cells. Cancer hadn't won, neither had my family's neglect. I was winning one small victory at a time. Eleanor was my rock through it all. I'd visit her coffee shop almost daily, sipping tea, while she regaled me with stories or dispensed advice like a sage. When I told her about the wedding, about standing in the spotlight, she clapped her hands like a proud parent. "That's my girl," she said, her eyes shining. "You showed them what you're made of." I admitted I hadn't spoken to my family since Megan's awkward confrontation in the garden. "They haven't reached out," I said, my voice steady, but tinged with hurt. Eleanor leaned across the counter, her gaze fierce. "Their loss, Hannah. You don't need their approval to shine. You never did." Her words were a salve healing wounds I'd carried too long. I started to see my family's absence not as a rejection, but as a gift, a chance to build a life on my terms. Work was thriving, and I leaned into it with a hunger I hadn't felt in months. With the grant money and new bookings, I paid off a chunk of Rosewood's loans, freeing up cash flow. I negotiated with Mr. Ellison to increase my stake in the Manor to 60%, a deal that made me the majority partner. He was thrilled, calling me the future of Rosewood. We planned a fall open house to showcase the venue, inviting planners, media, and local dignitaries. I hired a marketing firm to promote it using the Dispatch article as a centerpiece. The buzz was growing, and with it, my reputation. I was no longer just a small-time planner. I was Hannah Ellis, the woman who'd saved a historic estate, the entrepreneur with a vision. My family's silence was deafening in those weeks. No calls, no texts, not even a mention in the group chat, which had gone quiet after the wedding. I'd expected something, an apology, an acknowledgement, even a half-hearted excuse. But there was nothing, and I was surprised to find it didn't devastate me. I'd spent so long craving their validation, but now standing on my own, I realized I didn't need it. I had Eleanor, Tara, Mr. Ellison, Carla, people who saw me, who believed in me. I had my work, my health, my fight. that was enough. One afternoon, I got a call from the Historic Preservation Group. They'd seen the Dispatch article and wanted to nominate me for a statewide award, the Ohio Heritage Award, given to individuals who'd made significant contributions to preserving the state's history. The ceremony was in 3 months in Cleveland, and they asked me to prepare a speech. I was stunned, my voice catching as I accepted. When I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone, tears pricking my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of pride of disbelief that I'd come this far. I called Eleanor, who whooped so loudly I had to laugh. "You're going to need a bigger trophy case, Hannah," she teased. I didn't have a trophy case, but I was starting to think I might need one. The nomination pushed me to dream bigger. I started researching other historic venues in Ohio, drafting proposals to restore a theater in Cincinnati and a mansion in Dayton. Tara and I worked late, sketching budgets, contacting owners, building a vision that felt limitless. I hired a second assistant, a quiet but brilliant woman named Priya, to handle logistics. My business was growing, and so was I. I'd look in the mirror and see not just a cancer patient, but a leader, a creator, a woman who'd turned pain into power. My scarves became a style choice, not a necessity, and I started experimenting with bold colors, red, turquoise, gold, each one a declaration of my survival. One evening, as I reviewed contracts, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. My heart stuttered, but I opened it. "Can we talk?" it read. No apology, no context, just those 3 words. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her stew in the silence she'd helped create. But another part, the part that still remembered the sister who'd once braided my hair and shared her Halloween candy, wanted to hear her out. I typed back, "Maybe. I'm busy. Let me know when." It wasn't warm, but it was honest. I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but I was open to the possibility, a crack in the door, not an open gate. The open house at Rosewood was a week away, and I threw myself into preparations. We'd invited over 200 guests, including the Dispatch reporter, the preservation group, and several investors. I worked with Tara and Priya to design a showcase that highlighted Rosewood's history and my role in its revival. We created a video montage, before and after shots of the manor interviews with contractors, a clip of me talking about why preservation matters. I was nervous about being front and center, but I was also ready. This was my story, and I was done hiding. The night before the open house, I sat in my apartment, my journal open, and wrote about the journey that had brought me here. From the doctor's office, where I'd felt so alone, to the coffee shop where Eleanor had seen me, to the ballroom where I'd stood in my truth. I wrote about Rosewood, about the chandeliers and floors that held my heart. And I wrote about myself, the woman who'd fought, who'd risen, who'd become more than anyone expected. I closed the journal, my hands steady, and looked out my window at the city lights. Tomorrow I'd step into Rosewood again, not as a guest, but as its heart. I didn't know if my family would show up or if they'd ever understand what I'd done. But I didn't need them to. I was Hannah, and I was enough. The open house at Rosewood Manor was a triumph waiting to happen, and I could feel it in the air as I arrived that crisp October evening. The estate glowed under the autumn sky, its windows casting warm light across the lawn, the oaks framing it like sentinels. I'd spent weeks planning this event with Tara and Priya, every detail a reflection of my vision. White roses in crystal vases, a string quartet playing softly, a display of Rosewood's history, with my name woven into every chapter. My navy dress was swapped for a deep emerald gown, its long sleeves elegant against my still fragile frame, a gold scarf shimmering around my head. I was nervous, my heart racing as I stepped into the foyer, but it was a good kind of nervous, the kind that comes with knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. This wasn't just about showcasing Rosewood. It was about claiming my place not for my family or the world, but for myself. The ballroom was alive with over 200 guests, event planners, investors, local dignitaries, and the Dispatch reporter who'd first told my story. Tara and Priya flitted about. ensuring everything ran smoothly, while Mr. Ellison greeted guests with his trademark warmth, always pointing them my way. "Hannah's the genius behind this," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. I smiled, shaking hands, accepting compliments, my voice steady, as I shared the manor's journey. The video montage played on a loop, showing Rosewood's decay and rebirth, my voiceover, explaining why I'd poured my heart into it. Guests gasped at the before and after shots, murmuring about the chandeliers, the floors, the gardens, all pieces of me. I felt like I was floating, each nod of approval, a brick in the foundation of my new self. Midway through the evening, the MC, a local historian we'd hired, took the stage. The room hushed, glasses clinking as people turned to listen. "Rosewood Manor is more than a venue," she began, her voice clear. "It's a testament to vision, resilience, and the power of one person's belief. Tonight we honor Hannah Ellis, whose investment and passion saved this historic treasure." The applause was thunderous, rolling over me like a wave. I stood, my legs steady, despite the chemo's lingering effects, and waved my smile wide. The spotlight found me, and for the second time in months, I was the center of a room I'd created. But this time it wasn't a surprise. It was deliberate, earned mine. As the applause faded, the MC continued. "We have a special announcement. The Ohio Historic Preservation Society is here to present Hannah with a preliminary recognition for the Ohio Heritage Award to be formally awarded in Cleveland this spring." A woman in a sharp blazer stepped forward, holding a framed certificate. My breath caught. I hadn't expected this, not tonight. I walked to the stage, my scarf catching the light, and accepted the certificate, my hands trembling slightly. The woman shook my hand, her voice warm. "Hannah, your work is an inspiration. We can't wait to celebrate you further." I turned to the crowd, my voice catching as I spoke. "Thank you," I said. "This place, this moment, it's my heart. I'm honored to share it with you." The room erupted again, and I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness, but of pride, of joy, of a life reclaimed. I scanned the crowd, half expecting to see my family, but they weren't there. Megan's text a week ago, "Can we talk?" had gone unanswered after my curt reply, and I'd heard nothing since. No calls from my parents, no messages in the group chat, which had stayed silent since Lila's wedding. Their absence didn't surprise me, but it stung, a dull ache beneath the night's triumph. I pushed it aside, focusing on the faces around me. Eleanor, who'd closed her shop to be here, beaming like a proud mother. Tara and Priya clapping wildly. Mr. Ellison wiping his eyes. These were my people, the ones who'd seen me when my family hadn't. They were enough. The evening continued, guests mingling, the quartet, playing the ballroom alive with possibility. I was deep in conversation with an investor interested in my Cincinnati theater project when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there was my mom, her pale pink dress, a stark contrast to the room's elegance. Her face a mix of nerves and something I couldn't name. Behind her stood my dad, his tux slightly rumpled, and Megan, her eyes downcast. My heart stuttered, but I kept my expression calm, my voice even. "Mom," I said, nodding. "Dad, Megan, I didn't expect you." My mom's lips trembled, her hands twisting a clutch. "Hannah, we saw the article, and then Megan heard about tonight. We had to come." Her voice cracked, and I saw tears in her eyes, but I didn't soften. I'd cried too many times for their absence to let their presence undo me now. My dad cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "We didn't know, Hannah, about Rosewood, about everything. Why didn't you tell us?" The question was a spark to dry tinder, and I felt a flare of anger, sharp and hot. I'd said, my voice low but firm. "I called you when I was diagnosed. I texted, I left voicemails. You were too busy with Lila's wedding to care." My mom flinched and Megan looked away, her cheeks flushing. The investor excused himself, sensing the tension, and I stepped closer to my family, my scarf glinting under the chandeliers. I was fighting for my life. I said, my words measured but unyielding. "I needed you, and you chose a party over me." But I didn't stop. I built this. I gestured to the ballroom, its beauty undeniable, and I did it alone. My dad's face crumpled, guilt etching lines deeper than I'd seen. "Hannah, we're so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "We didn't understand. We were wrong." Megan nodded, tears spilling. "We should have been there," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I looked at them, the people who'd shaped my pain, and felt a strange calm. Their apologies were real raw, but they couldn't erase the months of silence, the years of comparisons, the way they'd let Lila's light dim mine. I didn't hate them, but I didn't need them either. "I hear you," I said, my voice steady. "But apologies don't change what happened. I've learned to stand on my own. I hope you can respect that." My mom reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Not cruelly, but firmly. "I'm glad you came," I said. "Enjoy the night." I turned, walking toward Eleanor, who was watching with quiet pride, leaving my family in the glow of the space I'd created. The rest of the evening was a blur of joy. I danced with Tara, laughed with Priya, toasted with Mr. Ellison. The investor called me later, offering seed money for the theater project. The Preservation Society emailed confirming my Cleveland speech. My business was soaring, my health improving, my heart healing. My family stayed until the end, watching from a distance, their faces a mix of awe and regret. I didn't approach them again. I didn't need to. The certificate in my hands, the applause in my ears, the love of the people who'd shown up, these were my victory. As I left Rosewood, the night air cool against my skin, I felt a shift. I'd faced my family not with anger, but with truth, and I'd walked away stronger. I drove home, the certificate on the passenger seat, and thought about the woman I'd become. Cancer had tried to break me. My family had tried to erase me, but I'd risen not just to survive, but to thrive. I was Hannah, the heart of Rosewood, the recipient of awards, the architect of my own story. And that was more than enough. The open house at Rosewood Manor lingered in me like a melody, its echoes carrying me through the weeks that followed. I'd stood in the spotlight, accepted an award, faced my family's belated apologies, and walked away with my head high, not because I'd proven them wrong, but because I'd proven myself right. I was Hannah, the woman who'd fought cancer, saved a historic estate, and built a life that shone brighter than their neglect ever could. My business was thriving, my health was improving, and my heart, though scarred, was open to the future. But as the autumn leaves turned gold and red, I knew the journey wasn't over. There were still questions to answer, choices to make, and a legacy to define, not just for Rosewood, but for myself. I threw myself into work with a renewed sense of purpose. The Ohio Heritage Award nomination had elevated my profile, and with it came opportunities I'd only dreamed of. Investors reached out eager to fund my next restoration projects, a theater in Cincinnati, a mansion in Dayton, even a library in Cleveland. Tara and Priya were my backbone handling logistics with a precision that let me focus on the big picture. We leased a small office in Columbus, a step up from my kitchen table, with a view of the city skyline that reminded me how far I'd come. I framed the preliminary award certificate and hung it on the wall next to the Dispatch article, a quiet reminder of my resilience. Every morning I'd walk in, see those markers of my journey, and feel a surge of gratitude, not just for the wins, but for the fight that had brought me here. My health was a work in progress, but I was gaining ground. Chemo was behind me, and my latest scans showed no new growth, a victory that left me sobbing with relief in my doctor's office. My hair was growing back, a soft halo of curls I'd touch in wonder, a sign that my body was healing. I continued physical therapy with Carla, pushing through squats and lunges, my muscles slowly remembering their strength. I ate with intention, avocado toast, grilled chicken berries, bursting with color, fueling a body I was learning to love again. My scarves, once a necessity, were now a choice. Bold patterns that made me feel like an artist painting her own story. I'd catch my reflection in shop windows and smile, seeing not just a survivor, but a woman who'd chosen to thrive. Eleanor remained my North Star. Her coffee shop was a haven, a place where I could be Hannah, not the award nominee or the entrepreneur, just me. We'd sit in the corner booth, sipping tea, talking about everything her kids, my projects, the dreams we both held close. When I told her about my family's appearance at the open house, their apologies, my refusal to let them back in so easily, she nodded her eyes wise. "You don't owe them forgiveness, Hannah," she said. "You owe yourself peace. Whatever that looks like, you'll find it." Her words were a compass, guiding me toward a truth I was still shaping. Forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about freeing myself. My family's silence resumed after the open house, and I let it be. Megan sent one more text a week later. "I'm here when you're ready." I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because I wasn't ready. I'd spent too long chasing their love, and now standing on my own, I needed time to decide what role, if any, they'd play in my life. The group chat stayed quiet, no more photos or gushing updates, and I wondered if they were grappling with their guilt or if they'd simply moved on. Either way, I didn't let it consume me. I had a business to grow, a body to heal, a future to build. The Ohio Heritage Award ceremony loomed in the spring, and I began preparing my speech, a task that felt both daunting and sacred. I wanted to tell my story, not just Rosewood's, but mine. The cancer, the loneliness, the strength I'd found in the dark. I wrote drafts in my journal, scribbling late into the night, searching for words that would honor the woman I'd become. I didn't want to dwell on my family's betrayal, but I couldn't ignore it either. It was part of the tapestry, a thread that had shaped me. I decided to focus on resilience, on the power of believing in yourself when no one else does, on the beauty of building something that lasts. One afternoon, as I worked on the speech in Eleanor's shop, a package arrived at my office. Tara called, her voice curious. "It's from your mom," she said. "Should I open it?" I hesitated, then told her to bring it to me. When she arrived, I held the small box, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. Inside was a silver locket, one I recognized from my childhood, my grandmother's passed to my mom, engraved with a tiny rose. A note was tucked beside it. "Hannah, this was always meant for you. We're so proud and we're so sorry. Love, Mom." I opened the locket, expecting a photo, but it was empty. A blank space waiting to be filled. I sat there, the locket cool in my palm, and felt a mix of emotions: grief for the years lost, gratitude for the gesture, uncertainty about what it meant. I didn't cry, but I held the locket close, a symbol of a door that might one day open, but not yet. I decided to wear the locket to the Cleveland ceremony, not as a promise to my family, but as a reminder of my own roots, the women who'd come before me, the strength I'd inherited. The ceremony was held in a grand auditorium packed with historians, architects, and community leaders. I wore a sapphire dress, the locket gleaming at my throat, my curls free of scarves, a quiet declaration of my healing. When my name was called, I walked to the stage, my heart steady, and delivered my speech. I spoke of Rosewood, of history's power, to connect us, of the courage it takes to rebuild when the world tries to break you. I didn't mention my family, but I spoke of loneliness, of finding light in the dark, of choosing yourself. The audience stood their applause, a wave that carried me off the stage, my award a sleek glass plaque in my hands. Afterward, I mingled with guests, accepting congratulations, swapping business cards, feeling like I'd stepped into a new version of myself. Eleanor was there, her eyes misty, and we hugged until I laughed, her pride a mirror of my own. Tara and Priya flanked me, snapping photos, their excitement infectious. Mr. Ellison sent a bouquet, his note calling me Rosewood's soul. I was surrounded by love, not the kind I'd chased from my family, but the kind I'd earned, the kind that saw me. As I drove home, the plaque on the passenger seat, the locket warm against my skin, I thought about my journey. Cancer had tried to take me, my family had tried to erase me, but I'd risen, not to spite them, but to honor myself. I didn't know if I'd forgive my parents or Megan, if I'd ever sit at their table again. Maybe one day, when the hurt had faded, I'd fill the locket with a photo of me, of Eleanor, of the woman I'd become. For now, I was content to let it stay empty, a space for possibility, not obligation. I pulled into my apartment, the city lights twinkling beyond my window, and sat with my journal. I wrote a final message, not to my family, but to the world, to the women like me who'd ever felt unseen. Your worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. You're enough, and your story is yours to write. I closed the journal, the locket glinting in the lamplight, and smiled. Rosewood was my legacy, but so was I. Hannah, the woman who'd fought, who'd built, who'd shown. The road ahead was open, and I was ready to walk it, not for anyone else but for me.